The cameras were King Lucian's last desperate act. For 3 years he'd watched his daughter waste away, not from illness, not from injury, but from something the physicians called catastrophic neural disconnect. Princess Isolde could breathe, could blink, could swallow when fed carefully. But she couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't respond to any stimulus the medical experts provided. She was 7 years old, and for 4 of those years, she'd been a living statue. Lucian had hired 17 nurses. All of them treated Isolde with clinical efficiency, turning her to prevent bedsores, feeding her through tubes, keeping her small body alive while her consciousness remained locked somewhere unreachable. They spoke to her in loud voices, as if volume could penetrate whatever prison held her. None of them had stayed longer than 6 months. The loneliness of tending a child who never responded eventually broke even the most dedicated caregivers. So Lucian installed hidden cameras throughout his daughter's chambers. He told himself it was for her safety, but truthfully, he was searching for something, anything, that might suggest his daughter was still present behind those vacant violet eyes. The newest nurse was human. That alone made her noteworthy. Her name was Isolde, and she'd arrived from the Southern Territories with references that seemed almost too perfect. Orphaned young, raised by a traveling theater troupe, trained in basic nursing during a plague that swept her village. She was 23, plain-faced, with dark hair she kept in a practical braid and hands that moved with unconscious grace. She'd been hired because she was the only applicant in 6 months. Lucian watched her first night through the camera feed. Isolde entered Isolde's room at sunset, as instructed. The princess's chambers were beautiful in a morbid way, silks and velvets in shades of silver and pearl, toys arranged on shelves that would never be touched, a bookshelf full of stories that would never be read aloud. The nurse moved efficiently, checking the princess's position in her specialized bed, adjusting pillows, examining the feeding apparatus. All standard procedures. Then she did something the others never had. She pulled a chair close to the bedside, sat down, and simply looked at Isolde. Not with pity. Not with clinical detachment. With genuine presence, as if the paralyzed child were a person who deserved attention rather than just a body requiring maintenance. "Hello, Princess Isolde," Isolde said softly. "My name is Isolde. I'll be taking care of you from now on." She paused, as if waiting for a response she knew wouldn't come. "I know you can't answer me. The physicians explained everything. But I thought maybe you'd like to know who I am anyway. Even if you can't tell me if you care." Lucian leaned closer to his study's monitor, watching intently. "I'm not very good at this," Isolde continued, her voice carrying a warmth the other nurses had never possessed. "Nursing, I mean. I'm better at other things. But those things don't pay well, and I needed work, and here we are." She reached out slowly and gently touched Isolde's hand where it lay motionless on the coverlet. "Your hands are cold," Isolde observed. "That's normal for vampires, I suppose, but it seems wrong for a little girl. Would you like me to warm them?" No response. There never was. Isolde began gently massaging Isolde's fingers, working warmth into the pale, lifeless digits. As she did, she began to hum. The melody was unfamiliar to Lucian, something simple, probably a folk tune from her territory. Her voice was untrained but pleasant, carrying through the quiet room like water over stones. After a few minutes, she stopped humming and spoke again. "The troupe I grew up with, they taught me that music reaches places words can't. They said it bypasses the thinking mind and touches something deeper." She smiled sadly at the unresponsive child. "I don't know if that's true, but it can't hurt to try." She began to sing properly then. A lullaby about stars and sailing ships, about brave children who traveled to distant worlds. Her voice strengthened as she sang, losing its self-consciousness, becoming something pure and genuine. Lucian found himself transfixed. Not by the voice itself, though it was lovely, but by the way Isolde sang. She wasn't performing. She was offering something. Giving freely with no expectation of return. The song ended. Isolde sat quietly for a moment, still holding Isolde's hand. "Good night, princess," she whispered. "I'll see you tomorrow." She released the small hand gently, arranged the blankets one final time, and left the room. On the monitor, Isolde remained exactly as she'd been, motionless, vacant, trapped. Lucian closed the camera feed and sat in the darkness of his study, wondering why tears were sliding down his face. The routine continued for a week. Every evening at sunset, Ilara arrived. She performed her nursing duties with careful efficiency, then she would sit and she would sing. Different songs each night. Some were lullabies. Some were ballads from theatrical productions. Some were simple folk tunes with repetitive melodies that seemed designed for children to learn easily. Lucian watched every session. He told himself he was monitoring the new nurse's competence. But truthfully, he'd begun to crave those evening hours. The sound of Ilara's voice singing to his daughter had become the only peaceful moment in his days of council meetings and military reports and the endless weight of a kingdom that demanded strength he no longer felt. On the 8th night, something changed. Ilara arrived as usual, moving through her routine. But when she sat to sing, she hesitated. "I've been thinking, Isolde," she said conversationally, "about what might have happened to you. The physicians say it was sudden, that you were a normal, healthy child one day, and the next morning you were like this." She gently brushed hair from Isolde's forehead. "That must have been terrifying. If you were awake inside, if you could feel yourself being trapped in your own body with no way to call for help." Lucian's chest tightened. He'd avoided thinking about that possibility. "I want you to know something," Ilara continued, her voice fierce despite its softness. "If you're in there, if any part of you can hear me, I'm not giving up on you. Everyone says you're gone, that there's nothing left to reach. But I don't believe that." She leaned closer, speaking directly into Isolde's ear. "So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to sing to you every night. And if you're there, if you can hear me, I need you to try. Try to do anything. Move a finger. Flutter an eyelid. Something so small nobody else would notice. But I'll be watching, princess. I'll see it." Ilara pulled back, studying Isolde's face intently. "Deal?" she whispered. Then she began to sing. A new song, one Lucian didn't recognize. The melody was haunting, minor-keyed, about a girl lost in a forest who followed music home. Lucian watched, barely breathing. Nothing happened. Isolde remained motionless, her chest rising and falling with mechanical regularity, her face blank as a doll's. But as Ilara's voice swelled into the chorus, something flickered across the camera feed. Just for a second, so brief Lucian almost missed it, the temperature gauge in the corner of the screen dropped 3 degrees. He rewound the footage. Watched again. As Ilara sang the words, "Follow the song through the darkness," the temperature dipped. Not a malfunction, the change was too precise, too timed to the music. Lucian's hands trembled on the desk. Vampires could control their body temperature consciously, lowering or raising it at will. It was one of the first abilities children learned. But Isolde had been paralyzed since age 3, before she would have developed that skill. Unless she'd been developing it in secret. Unless she'd been conscious this entire time, learning, growing, trapped inside a body that wouldn't obey her. He watched the rest of the recording with new intensity. The temperature fluctuated 3 more times during Ilara's song, each time coordinating with emotional peaks in the melody. Small changes, easily dismissed as environmental variance. But Lucian knew better. His daughter was responding. Not with movement. Not with sound. But with the one ability she could still control. Her own supernatural biology. She was answering the only way she could. Lucian didn't confront Ilara immediately. Instead, he watched more carefully. The 9th night, Ilara arrived with a leather-bound book tucked under her arm. After completing her nursing duties, she showed it to Isolde. "I found this in the palace library," she explained. "It's a collection of old ballads, the kind traveling performers used to sing in taverns. Some of them are quite bawdy." She grinned. "Don't tell your father I'm corrupting you with improper songs." She opened the book and began singing one of the ballads. A story about a merchant's daughter who disguised herself as a sailor to follow her lover to sea. Lucian watched the temperature gauge. It dropped during the verses about the daughter's bravery. Rose slightly during the romantic reunion. Fell sharply during the tragic ending when the lover died in battle. Isolde was tracking the emotional content. understanding, responding. His daughter wasn't gone. She'd been here all along, locked inside, desperately trying to communicate through the only channel she still possessed. And Ilara, this human nurse with her untrained voice and her stubborn refusal to give up, had found the key. On the 10th night, Lucian couldn't contain himself any longer. He left his study and walked directly to Isolde's chambers. Ilara was in the middle of a lullaby when the door opened. She stopped abruptly, rising to curtsy. "Your Majesty, I didn't expect." "Finish the song," Lucian interrupted. Ilara blinked, confused. "Sire, the song you were singing. Finish it." She looked between him and Isolde uncertainly, then slowly sat back down. Her voice, when she resumed singing, was shakier now, self-conscious under his scrutiny. Lucian moved to the environmental controls built into the chamber wall and pulled up the real-time temperature display. Then he watched both the screen and his daughter. As Ilara sang about moonlight and dreams, the temperature dropped exactly on beat with the melody's descent into its minor bridge. Rose again as the song resolved into major key hope. "Stop," Lucian said. Ilara's voice cut off mid-phrase. Lucian turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "How long have you known she was responding?" The color drained from Ilara's face. "Your Majesty, don't lie to me." His voice remained calm, but edged with something dangerous. "How long?" Ilara's hands twisted in her apron. "The 4th night. I noticed the room felt colder when I sang certain verses. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then I started paying attention to the environmental readout." She gestured to the display he was watching. "The fluctuations are tiny, but they're consistent. She's doing it deliberately. And you didn't report this to me? I wanted to be certain first. I didn't want to give you false hope if I was wrong." Lucian studied her carefully, looking for deception. But he saw only genuine anxiety and the kind of fierce protectiveness he recognized, because he felt it himself for Isolde. "Sing again," he commanded. "Something she hasn't heard before." Ilara nodded, took a breath to steady herself, and began a new melody. A song about a princess trapped in a tower who eventually learned to save herself. The temperature dropped steadily as the song progressed, fell during the princess's despair, held steady during her determination, rose triumphantly as she escaped her prison. Lucian watched his daughter's face. Still blank. Still motionless. But the environmental controls told a different story. When the song ended, he approached the bed and knelt beside it, taking Isolde's cold, lifeless hand in his. "Isolde," he said quietly, "if you can hear me, if you understand what's happening, lower the temperature by 5 degrees. He watched the monitor. 5 seconds passed. Then, slowly, deliberately, the room's temperature dropped exactly 5 degrees. Lucian's breath caught. Tears blurred his vision. "Again," he whispered. 5 degrees warmer this time. The temperature rose. 5 degrees precisely. "Oh gods!" His voice broke completely. "You've been here the whole time. All these years, you've been trapped, and I didn't know. I didn't realize." The temperature fluctuated wildly, whether from Isolde's emotional response or because her control was faltering, he couldn't tell. Ilara moved closer, her hand settling gently on his shoulder. "She knows you didn't abandon her, Your Majesty. She knows you've been trying." "How?" Lucian looked up at the nurse with haunted eyes. "How did you find her when 17 others failed?" Ilara's expression softened. "Because I wasn't trying to fix her or cure her. I was just trying to reach her. There's a difference." She knelt beside him, her hand joining his on Isolde's motionless one. "Isolde," she said gently, "we're going to figure this out. We're going to find a way for you to communicate better, to tell us what happened. I promise." The room temperature dropped and rose rapidly, 3 quick fluctuations that felt almost like excited agreement. Lucian looked at this human woman who'd accomplished in 10 days what an army of experts couldn't in 3 years. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't know how to repay you for this." Ilara smiled, sad but genuine. "Just let me keep singing to her, Your Majesty. That's payment enough." Act 2, The Melody of Words. They developed a system. Temperature changes were too imprecise for complex communication, but they established basics: sharp drop for yes, sharp rise for no, gentle fluctuations for uncertain. It was crude, limiting, but it was something. More importantly, they discovered that Isolde's control strengthened during Ilara's songs, as if the music provided a scaffold for her consciousness to grasp. Lucian cleared his schedule to spend evenings in his daughter's room. He and Ilara would take turns asking questions, waiting for temperature responses. "Are you in pain?" Lucian asked on the 14th night. The temperature rose. Relief flooded through him. "Can you see us?" Ilara asked. Sharp temperature drop. "Yes." "Can you hear everything we say?" "Do you know what happened to you? Why you're paralyzed?" A long pause. Then, "Yes." Lucian and Ilara exchanged glances. "Was it an accident?" he asked carefully. The room went cold, colder than Isolde's responses had ever produced. Ice began forming on the window glass. "Easy, princess," Ilara soothed, reaching for Isolde's hand. "We're here. You're safe." The temperature stabilized, but Lucian's mind was racing. Not an accident. Which meant someone had done this to his daughter deliberately. "Isolde," he said, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "Can you tell us who did this?" The temperature fluctuated wildly, frustration, clearly. She was trying to communicate something but lacked the means. Ilara stood suddenly. "I have an idea. Wait here." She left the room and returned minutes later carrying parchment, ink, and a children's alphabet primer. "We'll go through the letters," she explained. "You signal yes when we hit the right one. It'll take time, but we can spell out words." It was brilliant. Tedious, but brilliant. They spent the next hour painstakingly extracting 3 words from Isolde. Council. Poison. Mother. Lucian felt the world tilt. Isolde's mother, his late wife, Morgana, had died when Isolde was 3, officially from complications of a wasting illness. She'd grown weaker over months until one morning she simply didn't wake. 2 weeks later, Isolde had collapsed at breakfast. By dinner, she was paralyzed. "The council poisoned both of you?" Lucian asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Why?" This took longer to extract, letter by painful letter. Mother was human. Understanding crashed over him like ice water. Morgana had been human. A political marriage between vampire nobility and human royalty. The union had been controversial among the old vampire families who considered mixed bloodlines a corruption. But Lucian had loved her fiercely. And their daughter, half vampire, half human, had been healthy, bright, beloved. Until she wasn't. "They poisoned Morgana," Lucian said slowly. "Killed her to send a message about mixed bloodlines. Then they did the same to you. But you didn't die. The poison didn't kill you." Different letters now, wrong dose. Child body. Paralyzed, not dead. Ilara covered her mouth, horror in her eyes. They've spent 4 years thinking they'd successfully eliminated a half-blood heir. They don't know she's still conscious inside. Which means, Lucian finished grimly, if they discover she's communicating, they'll finish what they started. The room temperature plummeted so fast that frost spread across every surface. Isolde's terror was palpable. "No one is going to hurt you," Lucian promised, gripping her motionless hand. "I swear on my crown, on my life, I will protect you." Ilara began humming, not a full song, just a soothing melody. Gradually, the temperature normalized. "We need to keep this secret," she said quietly. "If the conspirators suspect Isolde can communicate, they'll act." Lucian nodded. "I'll investigate the council privately. Find out who was involved." His expression hardened. "And when I do, they'll pay for every day my daughter has suffered." More letters appeared through their painstaking system. "Careful, Father Trap." "What do you mean?" Lucian asked. "They watch you watching me." Both adults froze. Lucian had installed cameras throughout Isolde's chambers. But if someone on the council had access to the palace's security systems, they'd have access to those feeds. They could have been watching him discover Isolde's consciousness. The conspirators might already know. "We need to get her out of here," Ilara said urgently. "Somewhere they can't reach her." Lucian was already moving toward the door. I'll arrange for her to be moved to the eastern wing tonight. Fewer cameras, more defensible. He paused at the threshold, looking back at his daughter's motionless form and the human woman who'd given her back her voice. Stay with her, he commanded. Don't leave her alone until I return. After he'd gone, Ilara pulled her chair closer to Isolde's bedside and began to sing, not a lullaby this time, but a warrior's ballad about a soldier who never stopped fighting. The temperature held steady, reassured by the music. But in the walls, hidden cameras recorded everything. And in a private chamber 3 floors below, Lord Theron of the King's Council watched the feed with cold calculation, his hand already reaching for the communications crystal that would alert his co-conspirators. The half-blood girl was awake. The plan had failed. It was time for more permanent solutions. The attack came at midnight. Ilara had dozed off in her chair, exhausted from hours of letter-by-letter communication. She woke to the sound of the door being forced open and had just enough time to throw herself across Isolde's bed before the blade whistled through the space where her neck had been. 3 figures in dark cloaks filled the room. Assassins. The girl first, one hissed. Then the nurse. Ilara had no weapons, no training. But she had fury at anyone who would hurt a helpless child, and she had the heavy brass candlestick from Isolde's bedside table. She swung wildly, connected with something that crunched. The assassin stumbled back, cursing. The room temperature dropped so fast that Ilara's breath turned to fog. Frost exploded across the walls, the floor, coating everything in ice. Isolde was fighting back. The assassin slipped on the suddenly ice-slicked floor. One went down hard, his head cracking against stone. The other 2 advanced more carefully, blades raised. Ilara positioned herself between them and Isolde, candlestick gripped in both trembling hands. You'll have to go through me, she snarled. So be it. The blade came down and stopped, frozen mid-swing by a hand that appeared from nowhere and caught the steel. King Lucian materialized from the shadows, moving with supernatural speed. He'd never left. He'd been watching, waiting for this exact betrayal. What followed wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Lucian tore through the assassins with controlled brutality. Within seconds, 2 were dead and the 3rd was pinned to the wall by his own blade, Lucian's hand on his throat. Who sent you? Lucian's voice was winter itself. The assassin laughed through blood. You think we're the only ones? The whole council wants her dead. The half-blood abomination. Names. Lord Theron. Lady Severin. Commander Darius. The assassin grinned. All your most trusted advisors. All of us pureblood families. You chose a human over your own kind. Now you'll watch your bloodline end. Lucian's hand tightened. The assassin's neck snapped. He let the body drop and turned to find Ilara still standing protectively over Isolde, the candlestick raised, her entire body shaking. It's over, he said quietly. You can lower that. The candlestick clattered to the floor. Ilara's legs gave out and she sat down hard on the bed's edge. The room's temperature had returned to normal. Isolde had exhausted herself creating the ice, her first truly overt use of power in 4 years. Lucian approached his daughter's bed and gently touched her forehead. You fought to protect Ilara, he whispered. You found strength you didn't know you had. The temperature dipped, yes. He looked at Ilara, who was staring at the dead assassins with shock-glazed eyes. I need you to listen carefully, Lucian said. The conspiracy is larger than I realized. Half my council is compromised. I'm going to purge them tonight, but it means Isolde will be vulnerable until I'm finished. Ilara nodded numbly. I'm moving both of you to the vault beneath the palace. It's warded, defensible, and only I know the access codes. He helped her stand. Can you do this? Can you keep singing to her while I handle this? Ilara looked at Isolde's motionless form, at the child who'd mustered every ounce of power she possessed to protect her caregiver. Yes, she said firmly. I won't leave her. Act 3. The song breaks free. The vault was ancient, carved from bedrock beneath the palace's foundations. Wards glowed faintly on the walls, protection spells laid down centuries ago. Ilara sat on the floor beside the simple cot where they'd laid Isolde, singing softly. Above them, through layers of stone, they could hear distant sounds. Shouts. Clashing steel. The sounds of a king dismantling a conspiracy. He's fighting them, Ilara said quietly between verses. Your father is making them pay. Yes, said the temperature. Are you scared? The pause. Safe here. Ilara smiled despite everything. Yes, you are. We both are. She continued singing, a whole repertoire of songs now. Ballads and lullabies, anything to keep Isolde anchored. Hours passed. The sounds above gradually faded. Then footsteps on the vault stairs. Measured, deliberate, singular. Ilara grabbed a fallen guard's sword left by the entrance, raising it with shaking hands. The vault door opened. Lucian stood there, covered in blood that wasn't his own, his expression carved from ice and exhaustion. It's done, he said simply. Ilara lowered the sword. All of them? Lord Theron, Lady Severin, Commander Darius, and 6 others. Lucian moved to Isolde's cot and sank down beside it. The conspiracy is ended. Those who survive are in the dungeons awaiting trial. He took his daughter's hand, his bloody fingers gentle on her pale skin. You're safe now, Isolde. I promise. No one will hurt you again. The temperature dropped and rose rapidly, relief, joy, gratitude all mixed together. Your Majesty, Ilara said carefully, there's something we discovered while you were gone. Something important. Lucian looked up, exhaustion evident in his ancient eyes. She's getting stronger. Her temperature control is becoming more precise. Ilara gestured to frost patterns on the vault walls. She made those without even trying. I think the paralysis might have been protecting everyone from her abilities. Lucian stood, studying the intricate fractals of ice coating the stone. When vampire children develop power too young, their bodies sometimes shut down non-essential systems to compensate, he said slowly. The paralysis could have been her own mind protecting others from abilities she couldn't yet manage. And now she's had 4 years to develop control internally. He looked at his motionless daughter with new understanding. She might be more powerful than any of us realized. As if in response, the frost on the walls began to move. Deliberately. Forming patterns that weren't random but shaped, letters appearing in crystalline ice. Can I try? Try what, princess? Ilara asked. More letters. Wake up. Lucian's breath caught. You think you can break the paralysis yourself? It could be dangerous, he warned. If you've been using it as a control mechanism, please, father, trust me. Ilara took Isolde's other hand. We're right here. Whatever happens, we're with you. The room temperature began to fluctuate wildly, not random chaos, but a building pattern, like a storm gathering strength. Frost spread across every surface. The air grew so cold that Ilara's breath crystallized instantly. Lucian threw a protective barrier around them both. Through it all, they kept holding Isolde's hands, kept their presence steady, and then, the finger twitched. Not a temperature fluctuation. Actual physical movement. Isolde's right index finger curled, just slightly, against her father's palm. That's it, Lucian breathed. Keep going, little star. You can do this. Another finger moved. Then her hand began to close, gripping his with strength that grew by the second. The frost on the walls shattered, falling like snow. Isolde's other hand tightened on Ilara's fingers. Her toes flexed beneath the blanket. Her shoulders shifted. Her head actually turned, toward them. And her eyes, vacant and empty for 4 years, suddenly focused. She looked at her father. At Ilara. She saw them, truly saw them, for the first time in forever. Her mouth opened. Vocal cords that hadn't been used since age 3 struggled to remember how to form sounds. Father, she whispered. The word came out broken, rough with disuse. But it was unmistakably speech. Lucian's composure shattered completely. He pulled his daughter into his arms, his moving, conscious, speaking daughter, and wept. Ilara backed away, giving them privacy, tears streaming down her own face. But Isolde reached out with one shaking hand, gesturing for Ilara to come closer. Sing, she rasped. Please. One more song. So Ilara did. She sang the song she'd sung that very first night, about stars and sailing ships and brave children who traveled to distant worlds. And this time, in a voice rusty and unpracticed but filled with joy, Princess Isolde sang along. Epilogue. Harmony restored. 6 months later. The Grand Hall hadn't seen a celebration like this in over a decade. Banners in silver and deep crimson hung from the vaulted ceiling, and hundreds of candles cast dancing light across the assembled crowd. Nobles from all 5 territories had gathered, some curious, some skeptical, all unable to refuse a royal summons. King Lucian stood at the center of the dais, his hand resting protectively on the shoulder of the girl beside him. Princess Isolde wore a gown of midnight blue that complemented her violet eyes that now tracked the crowd with sharp intelligence. Her posture was still careful, still learning, but she stood without support. 7 months ago, she'd been a living statue. Now she was preparing to address the entire vampire nobility. And beside her, wearing the formal robes of a royal guardian, stood Ilara. The human woman who'd changed everything looked profoundly uncomfortable in the elaborate clothing, her fingers twisting nervously in the embroidered fabric. But when Isolde's hand found hers and squeezed gently, Ilara's expression softened into something fierce and protective. "My lords and ladies," Lucian's voice carried through the hall, demanding silence. "Thank you for answering my summons. I know many of you traveled great distances. Your presence honors both my house and this kingdom." He paused, letting the formality settle over the crowd. 6 months ago, I executed 9 members of my own council for conspiracy and attempted murder. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Some of you questioned my judgment. Some wondered if grief had driven me to paranoia. Tonight, I will answer those questions definitively. Lucian's hand tightened on Isolde's shoulder. My daughter, Princess Isolde, was poisoned 4 years ago by members of my council who believed her half-human heritage made her unworthy of our bloodline. The same conspirators murdered my late wife, Queen Morgana. They believed they'd eliminated the corruption of mixed blood from the royal line. The murmurs grew louder. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. They failed, Lucian continued, his voice carrying an edge of barely controlled rage. The poison didn't kill my daughter. It trapped her inside her own body, conscious and aware but unable to move or speak. For 4 years, Isolde suffered in silence while I remained ignorant of her imprisonment. He gestured to Ilara. This woman, a human nurse with no formal training in vampire medicine, succeeded where every expert in the kingdom failed. She reached my daughter. She found a way to communicate, and she helped Isolde break free from the paralysis that held her captive. Lord Castellan, one of the few council members who'd survived Lucian's purge, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we mean no disrespect, but many here have questions. The princess has been seen walking the palace grounds, yes, but she's spoken to no one outside your immediate household. There are those who wonder if she's truly recovered?" Isolde's voice rang out clear and strong, cutting through Castellan's diplomatic hedging. "If my father is parading a broken child for political purposes?" The hall fell absolutely silent. Isolde stepped forward, releasing both her father's and Ilara's hands, standing on her own before the assembled nobility. "I understand your skepticism," she said, her words still slightly deliberate but growing more confident with each sentence. "For 4 years I was nothing. A body without a mind. A burden. Tragedy. Why should you believe I've changed?" She raised her hand, and the temperature in the hall plummeted 10 degrees in an instant. Frost began creeping across the marble floor, spreading outward from where she stood. Several nobles gasped. Others stepped back instinctively. "I spent 4 years trapped," Isolde continued, and now her voice carried an edge of steel. "Unable to move. Unable to speak. But I could hear. I could see. I could feel. And I learned to control abilities that most vampire children don't develop until adolescence." The frost on the floor began to rise, forming delicate crystalline structures, flowers and vines that climbed toward the ceiling, beautiful and impossible. "I know which of you pitied me," Isolde said softly. "Which of you looked at my father and thought him weak for not simply ending my suffering? Which of you whispered about the tainted bloodline and wondered if the conspirators had the right idea, even if their methods were barbaric? The ice sculptures continued growing, becoming more intricate. Faces began appearing in the frost, the 9 executed conspirators, rendered in perfect detail. These are the nobles who tried to murder me, Isolde said. Lord Theron, Lady Severin, Commander Darius, and 6 others who believed that human blood made me less than vampire, that my mother's heritage was a stain to be eliminated. She turned slowly, making eye contact with nobles across the hall. I know some of you agreed with them. I know because I could feel the temperature change whenever you visited my chambers. I could sense your discomfort, your disgust, your relief that the problem of the half-blood heir had been neutralized. The ice sculptures shattered suddenly, exploding into snow that drifted harmlessly through the air. But I'm not neutralized, Isolde said quietly. I'm awake. I'm aware. And I'm stronger than any pure-blood child has ever been, precisely because of my mixed heritage. My human side gave me resilience. My vampire side gave me power. Together, they made me something new. She looked back at Alara, who was watching with tears streaming down her face. And I owe everything to a human woman who refused to give up on me. Who sang to me every night even when I couldn't respond. Who believed I was worth saving when everyone else had given up. Isolde turned back to the assembly. So here is what you need to understand. My father is restructuring this kingdom. Pure-blood supremacy ends tonight. Any noble family found conspiring against mixed bloodlines will be stripped of title and lands. Any council member who works to undermine human-vampire cooperation will be removed. She moved back to stand between Lucian and Alara, taking both their hands. This is my family now. A vampire king. A human guardian. And a half-blood princess. If you cannot accept that, you may leave. But if you choose to stay, you will show respect to every member of this family, regardless of their blood. For a long moment, absolute silence reigned in the grand hall. Then Lord Castellan knelt. Your Highness, he said clearly, your strength honors the crown. Your mercy humbles us all. One by one, other nobles followed suit. Some knelt immediately, genuine respect in their expressions. Others took longer, political calculation evident in their hesitation. A handful remained standing, faces carefully neutral. Lucian noted each response, filing away information about who could be trusted and who needed closer observation. Rise, he commanded. All of you. This is meant to be a celebration, not an inquisition. The nobles stood, and servants began circulating with wine and refreshments. The formal portion of the evening was over. Now came the careful dance of political networking and alliance building. But Isolde had made her point. The half-blood princess was not only recovered, she was formidable. Later that night, Alara found Isolde on the western balcony, leaning against the railing and staring out at the star-filled sky. The princess had changed from her formal gown into a simple sleeping dress, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. You should be resting, Alara said gently, moving to stand beside her. That display of power in the grand hall, it must have exhausted you. Isolde shook her head. I'm too awake to sleep. Too much thinking. About what? About how different everything is now. Isolde gestured to the palace grounds below. 6 months ago, I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Couldn't do anything except exist. Now I'm giving speeches and demonstrating power and playing politics. You were magnificent, Alara said firmly. You made them see you as you truly are. Did I? Isolde's voice held uncertainty. Or did I just scare them into compliance? There's a difference between respect and fear. Alara studied the young princess carefully. At 7 years old, nearly 8 now, Isolde had experienced more trauma and isolation than most people faced in entire lifetimes. The paralysis had stolen her childhood, but it had also forced a maturity far beyond her years. Some of them were afraid, Alara admitted. But others recognized your strength for what it is, not just power, but the will to use it wisely. You could have destroyed those nobles who spoke against you. Instead, you gave them a chance to choose differently. Isolde was quiet for a moment, then asked softly, "Do you think my mother would be proud of me?" Ilara's heart clenched. They'd spoken about Morgana before, the human queen who'd married a vampire king and paid for that choice with her life. "I think," Ilara said carefully, "your mother would be amazed by you. She'd see everything you survived, everything you fought through, and she'd be so proud she could barely speak." "I don't remember her very well," Isolde confessed. "Just fragments. The smell of her hair. The sound of her laugh. The way she used to sing to me before bed." She looked at Ilara with eyes that held too much sadness for a child. "You sing to me the way she did. Is that why I could hear you? When I couldn't hear anyone else?" Ilara felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe. Or maybe you were just ready to be heard, and I happened to be stubborn enough to keep trying." "I'm glad you were stubborn," Isolde said. She reached out and took Ilara's hand. "When I was trapped, I used to imagine what freedom would feel like. I thought it would be this huge, overwhelming thing. But it's not. It's small moments. Like standing on a balcony. Like holding someone's hand because I want to, not because I'm being moved into position." She squeezed Ilara's fingers gently. "It's choosing to trust someone. Choosing to be vulnerable with them. That's what freedom actually is." Ilara pulled Isolde into a hug, marveling at how far the child had come. The princess who'd been a living statue now initiated embraces, expressed opinions, made jokes. She was becoming a whole person again, or perhaps for the first time. "Will you sing for me?" Isolde asked, her voice muffled against Ilara's shoulder. "Not because I need it to communicate, just because I like it." "Of course." Ilara began singing, not one of the lullabies from those early nights, but a new song. A ballad about a phoenix rising from ashes, about transformation and rebirth and choosing to fly despite broken wings. Isolde listened, her head resting against Ilara's shoulder, her breathing slow and steady. Halfway through the second verse, she joined in. Her voice was still developing, still learning proper pitch and control. But it was there, present. They sang together under the stars, and neither of them noticed Lucian standing in the doorway, watching them with an expression of profound gratitude. 3 months later, the formal coronation of Ilara as queen consort should have been controversial. A human woman, barely noble, elevated to the highest position in the vampire kingdom. The old families should have rioted. Instead, the ceremony proceeded with unexpected smoothness. Perhaps because Isolde had spent 3 months demonstrating exactly what happened to nobles who questioned her family's legitimacy. 2 minor lords who'd made disparaging comments about Ilara's common blood found themselves facing the princess's icy displeasure, literally. Both had required extensive healing after Isolde, accidentally, froze them solid during a council demonstration. Or perhaps because Lucian had made it abundantly clear that anyone who opposed this marriage would find themselves exiled at best, executed at worst. But Ilara suspected the real reason was simpler. The nobility had realized that she made their king happy. That she'd given them back their princess. That her presence had transformed a grief-stricken monarch and his broken household into something resembling a functional family. Now, standing in the royal gardens wearing a gown of silver and white, Ilara barely recognized her own life. 9 months ago, she'd been a wandering nurse with no prospects and no family. Now she was about to become a queen. "You're thinking too much," Isolde observed. The princess sat nearby, weaving flowers into a crown. Her fingers still trembled slightly with the effort. Fine motor control was the last skill returning, but she refused help. "I'm allowed to think too much on my wedding day," Ilara replied. "It's traditional." "Is it traditional to look terrified? When you're marrying a vampire king who's lived for 8 centuries and rules 5 territories. "Yes, absolutely traditional." Isolde laughed, a sound that never failed to make Ilara's heart swell. The princess's laugh was rare, precious, hard-won through months of physical therapy and emotional healing. "Father is more terrified than you are," Isolde said. "I heard him pacing in his chambers this morning. He was muttering about whether the vows were too formal, whether he should have written something more personal, whether you'd change your mind at the last minute." "I'm not changing my mind." "I know, but he's been alone for so long. He's forgotten how to believe good things can last. Ilara moved to sit beside Isolde, watching the girl's careful work with the flowers. "What about you?" she asked gently. "How do you feel about all this? Your father remarrying, me becoming your stepmother officially?" Isolde's hand stilled. She looked up at Ilara with those uncanny violet eyes. "You saved my life," she said simply. "You gave me back my voice. You protected me when assassins came. You stood beside me when I was terrified to face the nobility." Her expression softened. "You already are my mother in every way that matters. This just makes it official." She held up the flower crown she'd been weaving, white roses and silver lilies, intricate and beautiful. "I made this for you. For the ceremony. It's tradition for the royal family to present gifts, and I wanted mine to be personal." Ilara took the delicate crown with trembling hands. "Isolde, it's beautiful." "I know my mother would have loved you," Isolde said quietly. She believed in human-vampire unity. She believed love mattered more than bloodlines. "You're living proof she was right." They sat together in comfortable silence until a servant arrived to announce it was time for the ceremony to begin. The ceremony. The palace courtyard had been transformed into something out of legend. Thousands of candles floated in midair, held aloft by carefully maintained spells. Flowers bloomed unseasonably, coaxed into life by vampire magic. The assembled guests included not just nobility but representatives from human territories, scholars from distant academies, even a delegation of traveling performers, a tribute to Ilara's own background. Lucian stood at the altar wearing formal robes in deep crimson, his dark hair threaded with silver, his expression carefully controlled. But Ilara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clasped and unclasped nervously. 8 centuries old, and he was nervous about a wedding. The thought made her smile. Music began, not traditional ceremonial trumpets, but something softer. A string quartet playing a melody Ilara recognized. The lullaby she'd sung to Isolde that very first night, arranged for multiple instruments, transformed into something grand and beautiful. She walked down the aisle alone as was her choice. No father to give her away, she'd lost her parents young. No family to surround her. Just herself, walking toward a future she'd never imagined. Isolde waited at the altar beside her father, wearing a gown of pale silver. When Ilara reached them, the princess stepped forward and carefully placed the flower crown on Ilara's head. "Welcome to our family," Isolde whispered. "Officially." Then she stepped back, and Ilara stood facing Lucian. Up close, she could see the emotion in his ancient eyes. See the way his jaw worked as he fought for composure. "I wrote vows," he said quietly just for her. "Spent 3 days on them. Consulted historical texts, asked advisors for guidance. Then I threw them all away this morning. Why? Because none of them captured what I actually wanted to say." He took her hands in his. "Which is simply this: thank you. Thank you for refusing to give up on my daughter when I'd almost given up myself. Thank you for bringing music into silence. Thank you for showing me that love isn't about bloodlines or tradition or political alliance. It's about seeing someone, truly seeing them, and choosing them anyway." His voice dropped even lower. "I see you, Ilara. Every stubborn, compassionate, impossibly brave part of you. And I choose you. Every day for whatever time we're given, I choose you." Ilara found she couldn't speak through the tears. So she did the only thing she could. She pulled him down and kissed him, ceremony and propriety be damned. The crowd erupted in applause and laughter. When they finally broke apart, the officiant, looking somewhat flustered, cleared his throat. "I suppose we can skip to the pronouncement then. By the authority vested in me and witnessed by the assembled nobles of 5 territories, I declare King Lucian and Queen Consort Ilara bound in marriage. May their union bring strength to the kingdom and hope to all who serve the crown." More applause. Cheering from the back rows where the Performers' Guild had gathered. And through it all, Isolde stood beaming, her flower crown slightly askew, looking more like a normal happy child than she had in 4 long years. 1 year later. The council chamber had been rebuilt after Lucian's purge, redesigned to be less imposing and more collaborative. Instead of a raised dais where the king sat in judgment, there was a round table where all members sat as equals. Well, theoretical equals. Everyone still deferred to Lucian when necessary. Ilara attended every council meeting now, her official position giving her voice in matters of state. She'd spent the past year learning politics, diplomacy, economic policy, all the skills she'd never needed as a wandering nurse but desperately needed as a queen. Isolde attended too, when her studies and therapy allowed. At 8 years old, she was the youngest person ever to sit on the royal council. Her insights were often startling, the perspective of someone who'd spent years observing silently, unable to speak but absorbing everything. Today's meeting focused on a proposal from the human territories. They wanted to establish a formal exchange program, human scholars studying vampire magic, vampire scholars learning human science and medicine, the kind of cooperation that would have been unthinkable under the previous council. The security concerns are significant, Lord Castellan argued. Sharing our magical knowledge could be dangerous if that information falls into hostile hands. The humans are sharing their knowledge as well, Ilara countered. Medical techniques that could benefit vampire soldiers. Agricultural innovations that could help the northern territories. This isn't one-sided. The Queen Consort makes a valid point, Lady Miriam, one of Lucian's new appointments, added. We've been isolated for too long. Isolationism leads to stagnation. Isolde, who'd been quietly drawing frost patterns on the table's surface, suddenly spoke up. The conspirators who tried to kill me, they believed isolation protected vampire purity. They thought mixing with humans weakened us. She looked up, her violet eyes grave. But I'm stronger than any pureblood child because of my mixed heritage. Maybe the same is true for the kingdom. Maybe we're stronger when we're connected, not isolated. Silence fell over the council. Then Lucian smiled, a rare, genuine expression. My daughter speaks wisdom beyond her years. Let's vote. All in favor of the exchange program. Every hand rose. Even Castellan's, though he looked reluctant. The measure passes unanimously, Lucian declared. Lady Miriam, draft a formal response to the human territories. Let them know we accept their proposal. As the council meeting concluded and members began filtering out, Isolde remained at the table, still making frost patterns. Ilara moved to sit beside her. That was very eloquent, she said. Your argument about strength through connection. Isolde shrugged. I just said what I believe. I wouldn't exist without human-vampire connection. Neither would lots of other children. It seems obvious that we're better together. Obvious to you. Not obvious to everyone else. Then everyone else isn't paying attention. Isolde completed her frost pattern, an intricate mandala of ice that glowed faintly in the lamplight. Do you know what I remember most about being paralyzed? What? The loneliness. Not just being physically alone, but being surrounded by people who couldn't see me, who looked at my body and saw a tragedy instead of a person. She traced one finger through the frost, creating new patterns. That's what the isolationists do. They look at humans and see something foreign instead of seeing people. They're making themselves paralyzed, trapped in old ideas, unable to move forward. She looked at Ilara with ancient eyes in a young face. You taught me that the opposite of paralysis isn't just movement. It's connection. Reaching out. Choosing to be vulnerable with someone else. Her expression turned mischievous. So really, this whole political revolution is your fault. Ilara laughed and pulled Isolde into a hug. I'll take responsibility for it, then. They sat together in the empty council chamber, the frost patterns slowly melting, and Ilara thought about how drastically her life had changed. A year ago, she'd been watching a motionless princess through hidden cameras, hoping desperately for any sign of life. Now that princess was reshaping a kingdom's future. Now Ilara was a queen, a stepmother, a partner to a king who'd learned to love again. Now everything was possible. 5 years later, Princess Isolde stood at the gates of the new Academy of Integrated Learning, watching students arrive for the first day of term. Human children and vampire children walking side by side, nervous and excited, chattering about classes and dormitories and the adventures awaiting them. The academy had been her idea, or rather, the culmination of her years of pushing for human-vampire integration. A place where children of both species learned together, studied together, grew up seeing each other as classmates and friends rather than as other. At 13, Isolde was too young to attend as a student. But she'd been instrumental in its founding, had worked with architects to design the buildings, had consulted with educators to develop the curriculum. And today, she stood watching her dream become reality. Thinking about what comes next? Ilara's voice came from beside her. Isolde smiled. Always. That's the problem with recovering from paralysis. Once you start moving, it's hard to stop. Ilara laughed. Your father says you've already proposed 6 new initiatives for the council to consider. 7, actually. The prison reform proposal is still being drafted. Isolde linked her arm through Ilara's. But I'm learning to pace myself. You and father keep reminding me I'm still a child, despite evidence to the contrary. You're still a child. A remarkable one, but still 13 years old. You're allowed to have fun occasionally, you know. To do things that aren't politically significant. Fun is politically significant when you're royalty, Isolde said dryly. Everything I do sends a message. They walked through the academy gates together, observing as students found their way to orientation. A young vampire girl helped a human boy who dropped his books. A group of mixed heritage children, half-bloods like Isolde, clustered together, finding solidarity in shared experience. Do you ever regret it? Isolde asked suddenly. Marrying father? Taking on all this responsibility? You could have had a simple life, but instead you're managing a kingdom and raising a politically inconvenient stepdaughter. Ilara stopped walking and turned to face Isolde directly. Listen to me carefully, she said firmly. You are not inconvenient. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Yes, I could have had a simpler life. I could have stayed a wandering nurse, living in obscurity, dying eventually without leaving a mark on the world. She took Isolde's hands. But instead, I got you. I got your father. I got to be part of something that matters. I got to help build a kingdom where children like you, children who bridge 2 worlds, are celebrated instead of poisoned. Her voice softened. So no, I don't regret it for a single moment. Isolde blinked back tears. I love you. I don't say that enough. You say it every time you trust me with your dreams and fears and ridiculous political proposals. Ilara pulled her into a hug. I love you too, sweetheart. Even when you're being impossibly stubborn. Stubbornness is hereditary. I learned it from you. And from your father. Definitely from father. They stood together, watching the academy come to life around them. Students finding their classrooms. Teachers greeting their pupils. A future taking shape that neither of them could have imagined 5 years ago. You know what I realized? Isolde said quietly. The poison that paralyzed me, it was meant to destroy me. To eliminate the corruption of mixed blood from the royal line. But instead, it gave me something the conspirators never expected. What's that? Time. 4 years of silence to observe, to learn, to develop abilities without interference. When I finally woke up, I was stronger than any pureblood princess had ever been. She gestured to the academy. They tried to end the future of human-vampire cooperation. Instead, they created its greatest advocate. Ilara smiled. Poetic justice. The best kind. A bell rang, signaling the start of orientation. Students hurried to their assigned locations, a mixture of excitement and nervousness evident in every face. Isolde watched them go, her expression thoughtful. Do you think they'll remember this? She asked. 20 years from now, when they're running the kingdom, will they remember that human-vampire cooperation started with a school? With the simple act of learning together? Yes, Ilara said with certainty. Because the best revolutions don't start with violence. They start with education. With exposure. With the realization that the people you were taught to fear are just people. She squeezed Isolde's hand. You've given them that gift. A chance to grow up without the prejudices their parents carried. That's more powerful than any magic, any military force, any political maneuvering. Isolde was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I want to teach here. Not now, obviously. But someday, when I'm older, I want to share what I learned during those 4 years of paralysis. What did you learn? That silence is an absence. That people who can't speak might have the most important things to say. That patience and stubborn hope can break through barriers that force never could. Isolde's voice grew stronger. I want to teach children, both human and vampire, to truly listen. To see beyond surface differences. To find the person underneath. Ilara felt tears prick her eyes. Your mother would be so proud of you. Both your mothers. Isolde leaned her head against Ilara's shoulder. I know. I feel them both sometimes. When I'm making decisions, I imagine what they'd say. Morgana would tell me to be brave. You tell me to be kind. Between the two of you, I think I'll turn out all right. You're already more than all right, sweetheart. You're extraordinary. They stood together at the academy gates, watching the future unfold, and Ilara thought about the journey that had brought them here. A silent child and a stubborn nurse. A vampire king consumed by grief. A conspiracy that failed because evil underestimated the power of simple human compassion. Everything had changed because Ilara had refused to give up. Because she'd sat on a floor and sung to a child everyone else declared unreachable. Sometimes revolution begins with a song. Sometimes healing starts with patience. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world is just someone who refuses to stop believing in possibility. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that stubborn hope transforms not just one life, but an entire kingdom. The end. Closing reflection. The song that only she could hear became the song that changed a kingdom. Princess Isolde waited 4 years for someone to truly listen, not to what she could say, but to what she desperately wanted to express. Ilara sang without demanding response, offered presence without expecting recognition, and in doing so, she found the voice trapped beneath paralysis and pain. But this story isn't really about magic or vampires or political conspiracy. It's about something far more universal. The courage to reach for connection even when everything suggests it's impossible. Ilara could have treated Isolde as the other 16 nurses did, as a task to complete, a tragedy to maintain. Instead, she chose to see a person. To offer music as a gift rather than a treatment. That choice rippled outward. It saved a princess, yes. But it also saved a king from grief, transformed a kingdom's politics, and eventually created spaces where children of different worlds could learn together without fear. What voices are we missing in our own lives? Who have we written off as unreachable because they communicate differently, move differently, exist differently than we expect? Isolde wasn't absent during those 4 years. She was screaming into a void, waiting desperately for someone patient enough to hear her answer back. Sometimes the most profound act of love is simply refusing to give up. Not with grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but with small, daily acts of devotion. A song in the darkness. A hand held in silence. A stubborn belief that the person you're reaching for is worth finding. If this story touched you, if you believe in the power of patience over force, of connection over isolation, of hope over resignation, let us know in the comments below. Share your own stories of unexpected connections, of barriers broken, of voices finally heard. And remember, sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply sit down, offer presence, and sing into someone else's silence until they find the courage to sing back. Thank you for listening to Isolde's song. May you find the patience to hear the music in others' silence, and the courage to offer your own song freely, without demanding harmony in return.